Week 18 wraps up the regular season for the New York Football Giants and the NFL at large. The playoff picture is set. How does it lay out for Big Blue? What are the takeaways from the Sunday slate of action? And another reason why Brian Daboll should be Coach of the Year. Yes, friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Locked On Nets podcast with the Brooklyn Nets. Second time I've had a problem with that in the intro. And over there, though, is going to be the healthy, wealthy, and wise Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I'm doing good. Usually after a Giants loss, you feel kind of bad. You don't want to watch sports in the morning. It almost feels like, Adam, this wasn't really a bad loss for the Giants. In fact, I don't even know if you could really count it as a loss, considering all the factors that are at play here.
Well, you will, because in the record, it'll say the Giants finished 9-7-1. But Andy makes a really good point, because I want to get to a thing about Brian Daboll, which reflects on head coaching around the NFL at large. Doug Norrie, actually, Locked On Nets co-host, we were watching a lot of these games together, and he made an observation that I think we sometimes overlook when we talk about the highest quality around the NFL. But inside of this Eagles game, to your point, the Giants come in, they're locked into the 6th seed. The matchups, yes, they can change a little bit, and certainly the Giants can impact those matchups if they were to go out and win that game. But the most important decision was, we're going to be going with a lot of our backups. We're going to take our key players off the field here. We're not going to risk anybody that's had some injuries. And oh, by the way, I will say, as we talk about this game, shame on you, me, and every single human being that was covering the New York Football Giants that didn't assume Davis Webb was going to start this game, because the thing you don't do is start your backup. Like, you don't play your backup quarterback in the meaningless game, because guess what? You may need him in the playoffs. So it actually was incredibly obvious that Davis Webb should and would start this game if the Giants were going to go that way. We didn't know for sure that it was going to go that direction as far as playing the backups. But I thought that was like, I looked at myself and was like, yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. Why would you risk Tyrod Taylor in week 18 and then say, maybe we'll have to use Davis Webb in a playoff game?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought process that I actually will take it a step further. I think because it was Davis Webb and what happened in the offseason, we should have known it from that rather than just being the third string. Remember, Adam, he was with the Buffalo Bills, so he has familiarity with the entire, Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, etc. He was offered a QB coach position for the Buffalo Bills and instead said, no, I think I still got a little bit of football left. I'll go play with the Giants. They've had him active for certain games to like get some bonuses, like wink, wink, let's give this guy what he needs. He gets his first career start, scores his first career touchdown in this game. It felt like the Giants were almost rewarding him for being a good teammate, a good guy overall. And listen, I really have no problems with it because, to your point, let's bubble wrap our starters. Let's bubble wrap Tyrod Taylor and get ready for the playoffs.
Oh, no, 100%. And that is a really good point. It's a nice little tip of the cap to Davis Webb, right? And who knows, he could be a coach for the New York Football Giants in the making here, right? Which is a good reason potentially to bring him along from Buffalo. So he's there as the starting QB. The reason why I say go the layer deeper on the depth chart is because Gary Brightwell ends up carrying the ball 11 times for 60 yards. Matt Breida, just 4 carries. You can't rest everybody, but Matt Breida has been the more consistent backup to Saquon Barkley this season. So you, again, try to save it a little bit there. We know there's a lot of guys. Guess what, friends? Did you remember when I said on the previous episode, maybe a Lawrence Cager sighting was in the billing? Yeah, 8 catches for 69 yards in this one. And I think that is a really nice sign for what the Giants can continue to build in the offseason. That's for another day. This game, go ahead.
I was going to say, while we're patting ourselves on the back, Adam, I just figured we each pointed out someone on the offense and the defense, and we had Andy's bet of the week. Do you remember who my offensive player was?
Your offensive player was it Kenny Golladay?
It was Kenny Golladay, and obviously Marcus Johnson was who you had saying he was going to come through. Kenny Golladay catches his first career touchdown grab for the New York Giants. They asked him if he kept the ball. He's like, what? Why would I keep the ball? Like, what are you, insane?
I heard the Giants took trade offers after he made the touchdown reception. They were
like, anyone want anything. Yes. Right. And then on the defensive side of the ball, do you remember who I highlighted as a potential guy.
Oh, who did you go with? Actually, you know what? I don't remember. I want to see someone on the defensive front, but I don't think that's right. I think it's in the secondary.
It was our main
Oh,
man,
Dane Belton.
Dane
No, I got you.
Belton.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
Dane Belton
And he
grabs
got a lot of
an
reps.
interception on the goal line, big play for the Giants. So Adam, we're giving the people what they want, even though we're navigating the who's going to be active, inactive list. We're getting touchdowns and interceptions galore in this game.
You better believe it. And inside of this game, so yeah, it's really good. God, what a great job by us. Watch out. You can subscribe on the YouTube channel and the podcast feed. But no, so it was those backup players that we thought we'd get a sample size from. The thing that we talked about coming in was building their confidence, knowing that if you needed them to step up in a key situation in the playoffs, you could rely on them. Kenny Galladay, whether or not that's really a part of the playoff picture, TBD, but that doesn't hurt. Likewise, I'll say like that Lawrence Cager specifically, I think that actually is somewhat impressive that he went out and had that kind of game. He's an offensive weapon that you can put into that mix in a very thin wide receiver room. Sometimes we know the offense can look a little bit stagnated. I'm not going to say, I don't expect it, but it's nice to know that he showed up in a big way there. So confidence building for some of the backups in this game. And then the matchup itself. So the Giants give up 10 points in the first quarter of this game. So you'd think, man, put it in cruise control, send out the signal. This thing will be wrapped up by halftime, and the Philadelphia Eagles will be getting Jalen Hurts and all their key players some much needed rest in the third and fourth quarter. No, 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 my friends, because even though the New York Football Giants didn't score more than 3 points in this game until the fourth quarter, it was only a 19-3 game going into the fourth quarter. It was a 2-possession game. The Giants had all the scoring drives that the Eagles put up. Field goal, field goal, field goal, field goal. After they had that touchdown in the first quarter, they held them to a ton of field goals. I thought Wink Martindale did an excellent job having these guys in good positions. And when you looked on this defensive side of the ball, I thought it was really impressive. And to remember some of the names, especially on that side, when we think about guys that have been a part of this, Timon Fox had a role here early in the season. McLeod has been a part of it of late. Cordell Flott was out there. Some of those names. Oceanic Ximenez, who we haven't talked about as much in recent weeks, but he comes in and fills in. Mondo in the middle of the field. I thought this was about as good of a loss, as you said at the top. It's about as good of a loss that you could have in the NFL because you got all the right feels of going out and beating the Eagles without any of the risk of your starters. And now I think you send an uneasy message to the rest of the NFC playoff picture of like, hey, like we can hang with the number 1 seed who had a bye week going in.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of how you draw the script up, Adam, the only noteworthy person that exited the game was Jason Pinnock, who left the game with what he's describing as a stinger in his shoulder, and he said, I'm good for the playoffs. Don't you worry about me."
Right.
And so when you think about how the Giants navigated Week 18, they avoided injuries to their major players. They got guys valuable reps that may have to step in at some point and make one key contribution. You mentioned a guy like Lawrence Cager. Who knows in the secondary who we may call upon, like a Dane Belton or something. It's like the Giants, and they showed that even with their second and third string players, that they can hang and be competitive against the Philadelphia Eagles, to your point. And when you think about the larger picture of the playoffs itself, I mean, if you're Philadelphia, you cannot feel all that great. Like, granted, you got the number 1 seed locked up, so you get the bye. That was your only mission in this week. But Jalen Hurts did not look great. They made sure that they kept him, bubble wrapped for as much as you can, knowing you needed the game.
Yeah.
But he was sliding down early. He was, he looked pretty inaccurate with some of his bigger throws. Man, when you look at the larger picture in the NFC, Adam, it's going to be interesting because the Eagles are not a team that's surging into the playoffs, say like someone like San Francisco.
Yeah, no, for sure. And by the way, though, don't forget San Francisco was playing the Cardinals yesterday, and that was a 14-13 game. It was a 1-point game, much longer than you'd want it to be. And more than anything, it reminded me, and this is what the NFL loves and what they want, of like winning margins are razor thin in the NFL. And just because you're a team that's been out of the playoffs for 3-4 weeks, it doesn't mean that you're a total dumpster. It just means, hey, the bounce of the football, a couple of injuries, etc. Good or bad coaching potentially. There's something that I want to reflect on before we go wide here on the NFC playoff picture. So it's 2 things in regards Brian Daboll. The first part is, and this is something that Doug Norrie was talking about when we were watching the games, was we always talk about maybe there's only really like 3 or 4 truly elite quarterbacks in the NFL. Well, maybe there's only like 3 or 4 truly elite head coaches in the NFL. Because if you think about some of the guys, Cliff Kingsbury comes to mind in Arizona. Well, when the NFL is on this upswing around offense and, they're doing everything and there's all these changes in the rules and it's going to really make it harder for defenses, there are going to be great offensive minds that know how to take that by, take that by the horns and run with it and be dynamic. And then all of the sudden, as defenses adjust, suddenly Cliff Kingsbury, as you've seen this season, looks like a guy that doesn't know where he's supposed to line up his wide receivers, doesn't look like a guru anymore. And there's a very finite group of head coaches. I think Mike Tomlin is one of those, right? Andy Reid is one of those guys that, hey, guess what? Ebbs and flows of the league, different kind of style, rule changes, we're always going to be successful. And I think Brian Daboll is putting himself in a position to start to be talked about in that mold. He's not there yet, but you could talk about him in that mold. And one of the key choices he made was obviously resting his players. And I thought it was interesting that Tom Coughlin, we may remember him as being the head coach who led the Giants to 2 Super Bowl victories over the New England Patriots. He was asked about the decision of Brian Daboll to rest his players. And you might think that he would say, back in my day, we would have gone for it. It's as some reflected in this Giants Wire article, loser's mentality to rest your players in week 18. Coughlin said, Brian has done a great job with his team. His team is bought in. They're playing hard. The coaches have done an outstanding job, and they have really taken their athletes and improved them, and they are playing really well. Brian will make the right decision about all of that. Went on to say, and we're talking about when he made the choice to take on those Patriots in an undefeated season, different scenario. But Coughlin said, we're talking about 15 years ago and a circumstance and a situation. We did the right thing. Whatever Brian does, I'm sure it will be the right thing too. And so it looks like he made that right choice. Andy, your thoughts, please.
You 100% right. And the other thing is, just look across into the AFC at someone that decided to make a different decision, Adam.
Not only a different decision, and I'm glad you brought it up, but I'm only jumping in because this is what I wanted to get to. The Chargers head coach, Staley, not only made the different decision of playing his starters, he knew at kickoff that the Chargers could do nothing to improve their circumstances. Baltimore had lost to Cincinnati. It wasn't going to matter for them. And he went out and played his starters. Then he lost Bosa. Then he lost Williams. And he kept playing his starters. It was a disastrous decision. You were seeing it all over social media from the fan base. This is a guy who has been on the hot seat for the Chargers, even though they're making the playoffs. And guess what? You know what the big problem is when you play all your starters and you lose some of them for the playoff run? Then you also go ahead and you lose the game. Kind of a triple down on the all-time bad moves that you could make. And they get to go to play the Jaguars. And while they've had a great season, you would have thought this is your best scenario, not playing the Chiefs, not playing the Bills, not playing the Bengals. You get set up with the best maybe possible matchup in the AFC playoff picture as a wild card team, and you absolutely blow the potential to win that game. I'm shocked they didn't send down the call from the booth after the first quarter, after the first snap. Hey, Staley, thanks so much. We'll go ahead and take a look at one of the assistant coaches the rest of the way.
I mean, people have questioned him. He's a really good offensive mind. He's also ultra aggressive. He's the guy that goes for it on fourth down in his own territory quite frequently, which raises its own question mark. So they're worried about his style of coaching. And then on top of it, Adam, to this point, Brian Daboll bubble wrapped Tyrod Taylor, and we have Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, and Joey Bosa going out there, and two of your all pros, Pro Bowl caliber players that you need for the playoffs are out. It just shows how razor thin the margins are in terms of good coaching, bad coaching, wild card teams. Everyone almost agrees, for the majority of people, that Justin Herbert is significantly better than Daniel Jones. Yet here we are. Brian Daboll has his team going into the playoffs, making the right calls for his team, putting his team in the best situation to win. Whereas Brandon Staley over there, what an absolute disaster. Outside of Justin Herbert getting hurt, it almost couldn't have been worse for the Chargers when there was literally nothing on the line.
Sean Payton's ears really, he perked up. He said, listen, I'm looking for suitors. They're going to make the playoffs. They're obviously off the hold the phone here, Betsy. We might have another potential landing spot for me in the room. One of the other spots that's been talked about when it comes to Sean Payton is the Dallas Cowboys. Now you'd say, yeah, but McCarthy, they've gone to the playoffs and they're looking good at that. But once again, hold on, because while the Washington Commanders eliminated themselves by not knowing the rules of being eliminated a week prior, they come out and they take on Dallas, and probably as bad as it could look for the Dallas Cowboys going out in a game that, while it's being played, in theory, you have a chance to jump Philadelphia to get the number 1 seed. And you could say you do a little bit of the scoreboard watching, and you say, we kind of looks like Eagles are going to have it in hand. That's okay. But it's not okay to have Dak Prescott look like a preseason journeyman quarterback as you get absolutely trounced by the Commanders in a meaningless game for them, 26-6, and really put yourself in a spot now where, from a confidence standpoint, like, Dak Prescott might be the most worst, like, less trustworthy than Purdy going into the playoffs. Like, it's insane to think that the Dallas Cowboys, and by the way, a little easy to pile on them, but it's also just insane to think that the Dallas Cowboys have had such a repeatable issue every year going to the playoffs, whether it was Tony Romo, whether it's Dak Prescott now. The quarterbacks seem to shrink in big moments, and they don't look like a team that is ever ready to hit the ground running and really be a threat in the NFC playoff picture.
Oh, I mean, listen, Dallas fans are probably going to say, we didn't really have a shot at the 1 seed. It's not that big of a deal. But to your point, Adam, they decided to play their starters as if they did care, and it did matter. And it wasn't the backup quarterback who's throwing pick sixes to Kyle Fuller against the Washington Commanders.
Yeah.
It wasn't the backup quarterback who threw 37 passes in the game. It's not like he threw 6 passes, they waved white flag, and he went to the sideline. Adam, he threw 37 passes.
No, they went for it.
Oh, they went for it. He had a 14 QBR. That is not good. He has the most interceptions of any starting quarterback in the NFL, and he missed a bunch of games due to a hand injury. Like, if you're Dallas,
straight weeks with an interception. Yeah. Which, by the way, this is the joke I made, was consistency is great, not in every category. Sometimes you can go the other way.
I like that. And Adam, if you're a Dallas Cow, like, you think about the Eagles, they didn't look great, but at least they have the 2-week bye. They're fine. They'll be okay. Jalen Hurts gets to rest a little bit. If you're a Dallas fan and you're saying, okay, now we got to go to Tampa, a game where we felt really confident in, now you're probably not so confident. And, like, if you talk about the pecking order of, like, whose stock's going up and who's confident, obviously San Francisco winning about 10 straight games, they're pretty high. But it'd be hard to argue that the Giants wouldn't be one of the next teams in terms of the NFC.
Yeah, I think, I mean, listen, we obviously, you take the step back and you say talent on the roster, etc. You look at, I still think when you look at a team like the Eagles, they have been well coached for most of the year. I think a misstep like this for them, or a little bit of a, fumble on their week 18 performance, they could probably brush that off, right? Jalen Hurts has been a little injured, etc. But beyond that, like, ahead of the Vikings, ahead of the Cowboys, ahead of the Seahawks for sure, right? Like, I think the Giants are certainly much higher in terms of teams that feel like they're doing the things they want to be doing heading into the playoffs. And one of those is feeling confident enough in what you accomplished over the course of the regular season to not go out and play your starters in the week 18 matchup. Now, again, different teams had different things on the line here, as we know, right? The 49ers were playing for everything against the Cardinals because they could have gotten that 1 seed. But the Vikings, we've talked about how legit they are or not. And now, just quickly on the Cowboys, man, we had said, boy, going out to Tampa might feel pretty good. I don't feel good. Like, Tom Brady is not Tom Brady of a decade ago, maybe, but I'll rely on his consistency and ability to perform in the big spots over Dak Prescott's. And that's really what we're talking about here. QB matchup to QB matchup. Yeah, I'm probably going to go on the side of Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, which does make things interesting because, in this playoff picture, so everybody won and stood pat effectively, right? The Vikings stay there at the 3 seed. The Bucs are at the 4, and then you get Dallas, New York, and then Seattle, which, before we get into this bigger picture here, we can talk about the Sunday night matchup. They flex this game. You have the concern of, like, well, Seattle, and then maybe Detroit will already be eliminated. They were. However, Dan Campbell's teams don't know what it means to be eliminated. And they went out and played, I thought, a heck of a game against Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has had an interesting season, very, very lackluster to start. They go on this dynamic run. He gives you all the sexy quotes, all the strange quotes about whatever he's up to. And they ultimately get beat. You looked at it as them laying an egg. And there's a lot of things to point to suggest that they did. But I'm going to go on the positive side of, like, that is a Detroit Lions team that started the year 1-6 and found themselves with a winning record by the end of it. That's a team that has Jamal Williams, who set the single season franchise record, passing Barry Sanders for the all-time touchdown record for Detroit. Like, that team accomplished a lot this year. And even though they missed the playoffs, and by the way, I wish it was them over Seattle because I think that's more exciting from a playoff standpoint because Seattle limped their way in. I'm gonna give the credit to the team that won that game, not look at it as, well, what did Green Bay fail to do? Even though we know there's some pretty big gaps along the way.
Yeah, so yes, kudos to Dan Campbell. They interviewed him before the game. They said, "Do you know that you were eliminated?" He's like, "Oh, you think?" Yeah, obviously, I'm a head coach.
Are you
Shout out to
aware?
Ron
Who do
Rivera.
you think I am, Ron? Who do you think I am, Ron?
Shout out to Big Ron. But you could see that team continued to play hard. They didn't care. And then when they asked him what's the motivation, he's like, "We don't want them to go. Like, you think we want them to be in the playoffs? Like,
Division
no, thank
rival.
you."
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if we could spoil Dallas in the last game of the season or whomever, like we would want to do the same thing. Here's the telling stat for me. Listen, the Packers had a win and in
Yeah.
primetime game at Lambeau Field in sub 30-degree temperatures, like everything that you draw up for the Packers to do what they need to do. And Jared Goff played better than Aaron Rodgers did. And like Jared Goff's knock has been he can't play in cold weather. He had a better QBR, he had a better passer rating, and he led his team to a victory. And listen, it would have been nice to see the Packers because I feel like they have a higher ceiling than, say, the Seattle Seahawks when it comes to what could they do in the playoffs because they have an elite, in his prime, they have an elite Aaron Rodgers that's two-time MVP of the league. But again, I was disappointed seeing the Packers go out in that fashion. But to your point, let's focus on the positives. Kudos to the Detroit Lions. They're a team next year that you look at and say they had a couple more pieces on defense, and all of a sudden they're on the upswing.
And that's exactly that's what it is, right? The positive vibe around Detroit, like, because again, Detroit being good is good for the NFL. Same way the Giants being good, the Packers being good, right? There's certain teams that you want to be playing at a high level in the NFL. It makes it better for kind of that historical aspect of the league. So Detroit, listen, they don't make the playoffs, but they're 9-8. Jared Goff, he may not be, the perfect QB, but he showed that he's more than capable of leading a high-powered offense. And now they're just some defensive pieces away. So, tip of the cap to them. Why? Because they're not in the playoffs, so we don't have to worry about them. So I can speak really positively about them. The just quickly on the AFC side, just so everyone is aware, it's the Chiefs, the Bills, the Bengals beat the Ravens. They're going to match right back up with them in the wild card round. We said the Jaguars are going to be hosting the Chargers, and then the Dolphins are going to go to the Bills, while the Chiefs will get that bye week. So I think it all worked out kind of all right. It's funny, both the 7 seeds to me, both the last wild card teams are not the wild card team you would want. Right, like the Seahawks losing a lot of games, you would have taken Detroit or Green Bay. I think Detroit was probably the best option given how well they had been playing. They would have been exciting. And then likewise, like on the AFC side, you're like the Dolphins, who are on their third string quarterback, which is just terrible to begin with. They've been limping their way kind of the finish line here. I think you wouldn't have hated if you could have got someone else. But the only thing I'll say from an AFC standpoint is I don't think the Patriots were really blowing anybody's skirt up when it comes to being a dangerous playoff team.
You mentioned Mike Tomlin. The Steelers were
The Steelers
just
is the team. That's the
yeah,
one.
they were
Yeah. And they
so
won their
close.
game. Another
They
team that 9-8 can leave the season missing the playoffs and feeling like you said we were going to be a dumpster fire this year. And this was the old head coaching thing. I don't know about taking off seasons. Like Mike Tomlin doesn't understand when you say, "Oh, so looking ahead to next year." There is no next year. There's weeks 1 through 18 that I need to go out and play.
Kenny Pickett looked good for the Steelers. Obviously, they won the game. They finished above 500 again. Mike Tomlin just finds a way to do it. You got to feel pretty positive. Very similar to the Detroit Lions in terms of having some good momentum towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
But Adam, it all comes back to the NFC.
Yep.
Giants versus Vikings. The Giants will play the Vikings at 4:30 p.m. on Sunday. Don't know if you had any initial reactions. I waited almost all night to try to see, like, when are we going to release this schedule? It wasn't to be until after they figured out the Packers were eliminated. But what were your initial thoughts seeing that the Giants were, midday Sunday?
I think it's a nice spot to be in. I think you look at that when you look at that next week's slate of games. Obviously, just off the top, it being the Vikings, we know there's familiarity there. I think you can look at it and say, "Hey, did we show everything we could have in that matchup earlier? A few weeks ago? Probably not. Did the Vikings have a perfect game? No. So there's 2 sides to that coin, and I don't think Giants fans should get like over their skis about, hey, it's just the Vikings. They have a really high-powered offense. They have the best wide receiver in the game, right? So there's going to be concerns there. But when you look at it, they're going to get on Saturday, it's going to be Seattle going to San Francisco, which actually, from a matchup standpoint, no team suffers going across country there. Chargers going to Jacksonville. And then, as you say, on Sunday, we're going to get Dolphins at Bills at 1, Giants, Vikings at 4:30. And then you end up with the Ravens and Bengals at 8:15, with the Cowboys and Bucks going on Monday, which I'm surprised that they have that Monday night game inside of the wild card weekend for some strange reason. Nevertheless,
they just try to
I love it.
maximize. Yeah, it's weird. They maximize time and all this different stuff,
I
but
know.
it
It's
is
like,
interesting to see. They buried the Dolphins versus Bills game.
yeah,
They buried the San Francisco versus Seattle game.
they
They're
put
both
the Giants in a nice spot, right? You're not prime time, which you wouldn't expect to be, because the Bengals Ravens is going to be a good one if Lamar's coming back. But it's a pretty sweet spot, man. You're front and center. All eyes on you.
And Adam, at the end of the day, perhaps,
Big my
the way that I'm looking at this is we have all week to talk about this matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. We talked about it at length. The way that the playoff picture sets up for the Giants, avoiding San Francisco,
Yeah.
playing against Minnesota, against a team that you were within, if it wasn't a last second record breaking field goal against you, you're going to overtime against that team.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the ways this could have broken out for the Giants making the playoffs, while you don't necessarily get to always have your wish, setting up a game against the Vikings is probably as good as it can get for Brian Daboll and the New York Giants.
I think so. We talk about looking at a big picture. If the Giants were to advance, and we think we know it would be the Eagles waiting for you if Seattle loses to San Francisco, right? We're going to be the lowest seed. That's who we'll go to take on. Again, then you feel like, hey, we just played them and pretty well. The Cowboys are the team, obviously, that we'd like to get a little bit revenge against at some point too. Again, it's one of those things, man. If you're in the ASC, you feel like, boy, is this going to be a crapshoot? And I think you could play the AFC playoffs and get a slightly different result every single time, with some of the best teams finishing bottom, some of the worst teams getting up top. Be a very much just a kind of roll of the dice. In the NFC, maybe it'd be the same case, but it would be more because there's a lot of average play. There's a lot of concerns. There's a lot of questionable coaching decisions. And that's where I keep coming back to. When you look at the NFC playoff picture and you think about the head coaches right now, we said it at the top, team-wise, as well as I think from a head coaching standpoint. I feel as confident in Brian Daboll as I do ahead of the Cowboys, ahead of, right now, team included, Pete Carroll, respect the hell out of him, ahead of the Bucks right now, maybe even ahead of the Vikings, right? So, like, if you feel like you might be the third best team when it comes to preparation and potentially execution, that means you got a puncher's chance. So, as you said, we're going to talk about this all week long. They did already break out. Did you know this, Andy? We can already tell you who the opponents are going to be next year for the New York Football Giants, because now we
Yeah,
know.
I saw that. I took a quick peek at the schedule. Obviously, it's way too early because we don't even know who's going to be on this roster or what's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, based
We'll
on this year, you got to like your chances.
Yeah, we'll tap into that a little bit. We play the Jets in season. How about that? But yeah, so all these things, and like you said, all week long here, starting tomorrow. Normally it's Thursday and Friday we get into the matchup. This is going to be starting tomorrow. Give me 2 key matchups on offense. Let's break those down. 2 key on defense. We're going to try to go as deep as we can on what Minnesota does well, how you can shut down some of the dangerous weapons, what worked in the previous matchup, how do you carry that over, how do you show different offensive wrinkles. There's so many things that the Giants, from a coaching and execution standpoint on the field, can really switch up, I think, in a different way than Minnesota, who rightfully is going to say, we're just going to lean on what we do best and try to go out there and win the game. And that's what I also think makes the Giants dangerous. There are other things that they can potentially do that teams have not seen. And we have a couple of key stats around that, Andy, that we locked up, and we'll start breaking down tomorrow on the podcast. You get us over on YouTube, where we're doing this thing 5 days a week. You get us on the podcast feed, and like, subscribe, share, glowing reviews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just know that as we break this one down, Andrew Makowitz every single day, all throughout the playoffs, is going to want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.